The morning sun cast long shadows across Dubai's gleaming skyscrapers as Karim Al-Rahman navigated his Mercedes through the bustling streets. At 38, he had everything money could buy: a thriving international business empire, a magnificent mansion, and a fleet of luxury cars. Yet something felt missing in his meticulously ordered world. Lost in thoughts about his upcoming board meeting, Karim barely registered the blur of movement at the edge of his vision. His driver's instincts kicked in immediately, and he swerved, but not quickly enough. The impact, though minor, sent a jolt through his entire body. Time seemed to freeze as he stepped out of his car, his heart pounding against his ribcage. A young woman lay on the ground, conscious but clearly distressed. Her hands protectively cradled her pregnant belly, and her eyes, though filled with fear, held a fierce determination. The gathering crowd's murmurs grew louder as Karim knelt beside her, his usual composure shattered by the gravity of the situation. "I'm so sorry," he managed to say, his voice barely steady. "Please let me help you." The woman, who later introduced herself as Sarah Mitchell, was 7 months pregnant and looked severely malnourished. Her clothes, though clean, were worn, and her face bore the subtle marks of someone who had been through significant hardship. When the ambulance arrived, Karim did something completely out of character. He climbed in alongside her, leaving his precious car in his assistant's capable hands. At the hospital, the reality of Sarah's situation became clear. The doctors confirmed that while the baby was stable, Sarah herself was suffering from severe malnutrition and exhaustion. When they asked about her emergency contact, her silence spoke volumes. "I'll take responsibility," Karim heard himself say, surprising even himself. The words had left his mouth before his usually calculating mind could process them. For the first time in his life, he was acting purely on instinct. Sarah watched him with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. "Why would you help me?" she asked, her voice weak but determined. "You don't know me." Karim straightened his designer suit, a habit he'd developed when uncomfortable. "Because it's the right thing to do," he replied simply, though he wasn't entirely sure why he felt so compelled to help this stranger. The doctors insisted on keeping Sarah overnight for observation, and Karim used the time to make arrangements. He called his household staff, instructing them to prepare the guest wing of his mansion. Money and influence opened doors, and by the next morning, he had already arranged for the best prenatal care team in Dubai to oversee Sarah's pregnancy. When he returned to the hospital the next day, Sarah was sitting up in bed, looking marginally better, but still guarded. The sunlight streaming through the window highlighted the vulnerability in her features, and for a moment, Karim felt an unfamiliar tug at his heart. "I have a proposal," he said, maintaining his professional demeanor. "I've arranged for you to stay at my residence until you're fully recovered and the baby is born. You'll have the best medical care, proper nutrition, and complete privacy." Sarah's eyes widened with disbelief. That's too much. I can't accept that." "Please," Karim insisted, his voice softening. "Consider it my way of making amends." As Sarah studied his face, searching for any sign of ulterior motives, Karim realized that this moment would change both their lives forever. Neither of them could have predicted how this chance encounter would unravel the carefully constructed walls around their hearts, leading them down a path neither had ever imagined possible. The decision Sarah made in that hospital room would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything Karim thought he knew about love, family, and the true meaning of wealth. As he helped her into his car later that day, he couldn't shake the feeling that his ordered, predictable world was about to be turned upside down, and somehow that didn't seem like such a bad thing anymore. Sarah's first steps into Karim's mansion felt like entering another world entirely. The marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers, and priceless artwork adorned walls that seemed to stretch endlessly. A team of staff members stood ready to attend to her every need, their presence both reassuring and overwhelming. "This will be your wing," Karim explained, leading her through a series of elegantly appointed rooms. The space was larger than any apartment she'd ever lived in, decorated in soft creams and blues that somehow managed to feel both luxurious and comforting. You'll have complete privacy here and the staff will be available whenever you need anything. Sarah ran her hand along a silk-upholstered chair, feeling more out of place with each passing moment. "I've never—" she started, then stopped, unsure how to express the magnitude of the contrast between this life and her own. Her entire world had fit into a single suitcase just days ago. Karim watched her carefully, noting the way she held herself, like someone expecting to be told they didn't belong. "The medical team will visit tomorrow morning," he said, keeping his tone professionally neutral. "In the meantime, please make yourself comfortable. Consider this your home for now." As he turned to leave, Sarah's voice stopped him. "Mr. Al-Rahman," she called out, her voice smaller than she intended. "Why are you really doing all this?" He paused at the doorway, his shoulders tensing slightly. "I told you at the hospital it's the right thing to do." But they both knew it was more complicated than that. As Karim walked away, his usually steady stride betrayed a hint of uncertainty. For the first time in years, he felt off balance in his own home. That evening, as Sarah sat alone in her new quarters, the reality of her situation began to sink in. The luxurious bathroom with its marble tub and array of expensive toiletries, the walk-in closet larger than her old bedroom, the private terrace, overlooking manicured gardens. It all felt like a dream she might wake from at any moment. She placed a hand on her swollen belly, feeling the baby's gentle movements. "What do you think of all this, little one?" she whispered. "Should we trust him?" Meanwhile, in his study, Karim found himself unable to focus on work. His thoughts kept drifting to his new house guest. The way she had looked at the mansion, not with greed or calculation as others had, but with a mixture of awe and wariness, intrigued him. He'd grown accustomed to people wanting something from him, yet Sarah seemed almost reluctant to accept his help. The next morning, Karim was surprised to find Sarah in the kitchen, attempting to make her own breakfast, despite the chef's obvious distress. She wore a simple maternity dress provided by his staff, her honey-brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, looking far healthier than she had in the hospital. "You don't have to do that," he said, watching as she insisted on brewing her own tea. "The staff is here to help." Sarah turned to face him, a determined set to her jaw. "I need to do some things for myself, Mr. Al-Rahman. I won't be helpless just because I'm pregnant and temporarily displaced." Something about her quiet dignity struck him. This wasn't a woman looking for an easy life or a handout. This was someone who had been knocked down by circumstances but refused to stay down. "Please," he found himself saying, "call me Karim." Their eyes met across the kitchen island, and for a moment the air seemed charged with unspoken questions. Sarah was the first to look away, her cheeks flushing slightly. As the days passed, they fell into an unusual routine. Karim would check on her each morning before leaving for work, briefing the medical team and staff about her needs. Sarah, determined to maintain some independence, would spend her days exploring the mansion's library, walking in the gardens when the heat allowed, and occasionally surprising the kitchen staff with her insistence on helping prepare meals. But beneath the surface of their cordial interactions, something deeper was brewing. Karim found himself thinking about her at odd moments during his business meetings. The way she smiled when talking to her unborn child, how she treated his staff with genuine kindness, the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from her despite her circumstances. These thoughts invaded his usually focused mind. For Sarah, the situation was equally confusing. She'd sworn never to depend on a man again after what happened with her ex, yet here she was, living in another man's home, accepting his help. But Karim was different from any man she'd known. Despite his wealth and power, there was a gentleness to him that she hadn't expected, a reflexive kindness that seemed at odds with his businessman exterior. Neither of them realized that their carefully maintained distance was about to be challenged, in ways they couldn't imagine, as the past they were both trying to leave behind refused to stay buried. As the Dubai summer reached its peak, Sarah's pregnancy progressed smoothly under the careful attention of Karim's medical team. Her body had responded well to proper nutrition and rest, and her once hollow cheeks had filled out, giving her a healthy glow. But on this particular evening, As she stood on her private terrace watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, her mind wandered to darker places. The sound of expensive shoes clicking against marble announced Karim's presence before she saw him. He had begun stopping by her wing more frequently, though he always maintained a professional distance. Tonight, however, something in her posture made him pause. "Is everything all right?" he asked, joining her at the railing, but careful to leave space between them. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, a defensive gesture she'd never quite abandoned. "I received an email today," she said quietly, "from Marcus." Karim's posture stiffened immediately. In the weeks since Sarah had come to stay with him, she'd revealed very little about her ex-partner, but what little she had shared had painted a picture of a manipulative, controlling man who had abandoned her when she needed him most. What did he want? Karim's voice was carefully neutral, though his hands gripped the railing slightly tighter. "He says he's changed, that he wants to be part of the baby's life." Sarah's voice trembled slightly. "He found out I'm staying here somehow. He's in Dubai." The revelation hung heavy in the air between them. Karim turned to face her fully, his business mask slipping to reveal genuine concern. "Sarah, look at me," he said gently. "Do you want to see him?" She met his gaze, and for a moment, the vulnerability in her eyes made his heart clench. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Not of him exactly. I'm afraid of myself, of being weak enough to believe him again." Without thinking, Karim reached out and took her hand. It was the first time he had initiated physical contact since helping her into his car that first day, and they both felt the significance of the gesture. "You are not weak," he said firmly. "I've watched you these past weeks. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met." Sarah looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. "You don't know everything about me," she whispered. "About my past." "Then tell me," he replied, surprising them both with the intensity in his voice. And so, as the sun disappeared below the horizon and the first stars began to appear, Sarah told him everything. How she'd met Marcus at a time when she was vulnerable, recently arrived in Dubai with dreams of starting a new life. How he'd seemed so perfect at first, charming, successful, attentive. How gradually, almost imperceptibly, he had begun to control every aspect of her life. "He convinced me to quit my job," she said, her voice growing stronger as she finally released the words she'd held inside for so long. "Said he would take care of everything. Then he isolated me from my friends, my family back home. By the time I discovered I was pregnant, I was completely dependent on him." Karim listened intently, his hand still holding hers, his thumb unconsciously tracing soothing circles on her skin. "When I told him about the baby, he changed completely. Accused me of trapping him, said it wasn't his. He threw me out with nothing but what I could carry in one bag." Sarah's free hand rested protectively on her belly. "I spent weeks moving from cheap hotel to cheaper hotel, trying to make my savings last. That's why, that day when you found me, you were exhausted." "Malnourished," Karim finished, finally understanding the full picture. His protective instincts, already strong, flared even more intensely. "I won't let him hurt you," he said, the words coming from deep within him. "Either of you." Sarah looked up at him, seeing something in his eyes that made her breath catch. The sophisticated businessman was gone, replaced by someone rawer, more primal in his need to protect. "Karim," she said softly, testing the intimacy of his first name on her lips. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door. You've already done so much." "No," he interrupted, taking her other hand so that they faced each other fully. "You are not trouble. You are—" He paused, struggling with emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "You are under my protection now. Both of you." The intensity of the moment was broken by a gentle kick from the baby, strong enough that Karim felt it through their joined hands. Sarah laughed softly, some of the tension leaving her body. "I think someone agrees with you," she said, smiling despite the tears in her eyes. What neither of them knew was that at that very moment, Marcus was setting in motion a plan that would test not only their growing bond, but also everything they thought they knew about themselves and each other. The peaceful routine they had established was about to be shattered, forcing them both to confront not only the shadows of their past, but also the uncertain future that lay ahead. The following days brought subtle but significant changes to life in the Al-Rahman mansion. Karim had quietly doubled the security personnel, though he was careful not to alarm Sarah. Security cameras were upgraded, and the guard patrol schedules were enhanced. Yet these precautions didn't prevent him from lying awake at night, his mind racing with concerns about Marcus's presence in Dubai. One morning, as Sarah entered the dining room for breakfast, she found Karim already there, engaged in an intense phone conversation in Arabic. Though she couldn't understand the words, his tone carried an edge she'd never heard before. When he noticed her, he quickly ended the call and attempted to smooth his features into their usual calm expression. "Good morning," he said, rising automatically as she entered the room, a gentlemanly habit that still made her smile despite her concern. "How are you feeling today?" "I'm fine," Sarah replied, studying his face. "But you're not. What's wrong?" Karim hesitated, debating how much to share. In the weeks since their conversation on the terrace, they'd grown closer, the walls between them gradually lowering. Still, his instinct to protect her warred with his growing desire to be honest about everything. "Marcus has been making inquiries about you in the business community," he finally admitted, watching her carefully. "He's been telling people he's the baby's father and has rights." Sarah's hand trembled as she set down her teacup. "He has no rights," she said firmly, though her voice carried a hint of fear. "He abandoned us. He made his choice." "I know," Karim said softly, moving to stand beside her chair. "But he's trying to create a narrative that paints him as a concerned father, and you as someone taking advantage of my generosity." The implication made Sarah's cheeks burn with anger and shame. Of course. That's exactly what he would do. Try to twist everything to make himself look like the victim. Without thinking, Karim reached out and took her hand, a gesture that had become increasingly natural between them. "No one who knows you could ever believe that," he said firmly. "You are the strongest, most genuine person I've ever met." Sarah looked up at him, finding such sincere conviction in his dark eyes that it made her heart skip a beat. The morning. Sunlight streaming through the windows highlighted the worried crease between his brows, the subtle signs of sleepless nights she hadn't noticed before. This powerful businessman had been fighting battles on her behalf without ever letting her see the strain. "I never meant to bring all this chaos into your life," she said softly. "Sarah," Karim's voice carried a note of intensity that made her breath catch. "You haven't brought chaos. You've brought—" He paused, struggling to find the right words. "You've brought life into this house. Real life, not just the hollow existence I had before." The moment stretched between them, heavy, with unspoken feelings. Sarah found herself studying the strong line of his jaw, the subtle flecks of gold in his eyes that she'd never noticed before. Karim's thumb unconsciously traced patterns on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. The spell was broken by the arrival of Karim's assistant, Ahmad, who entered with an urgent expression. "Mr. Al-Rahman, I apologize for interrupting, but there's a situation that requires your immediate attention." Karim straightened, though he didn't immediately release Sarah's hand. "What is it?" "Mr. Marcus Bennett is at the front gate," Ahmad said carefully. "He's demanding to see Ms. Mitchell. He's threatening to go to the press with accusations about the nature of her stay here." Sarah's hand tightened in Karim's grip. The baby, sensing her distress, kicked sharply, making her wince. Karim noticed immediately and knelt beside her chair, his free hand moving to her belly in a protective gesture that felt completely natural. "It's all right," he said softly to both Sarah and the active child within her. Then, to Ahmad, his voice took on a steel edge she'd never heard before. "Tell security to escort Mr. Bennett off the property. And Ahmad, make sure our legal team is fully briefed on the situation. I want restraining order papers drawn up immediately." After Ahmad left, Karim remained kneeling beside Sarah's chair, one hand still on her belly where the baby had settled, the other holding her trembling fingers. "I meant what I said before," he said quietly. "I will protect you both, whatever it takes." Sarah looked down at this powerful man who had somehow become her defender, her friend, and perhaps something more that neither of them was ready to name yet. The way he touched her so naturally, protective of both her and the baby, made her heart ache with feelings she'd thought she'd never risk feeling again. What neither of them realized was that Marcus's appearance at the gate was just the beginning. His desperate attempt to regain control over Sarah would set in motion a chain of events that would force both Karim and Sarah to confront not only their growing feelings for each other, but also the deep-seated fears and insecurities that had shaped their lives until now. The Dubai business community was abuzz with whispers and speculation. The usually private Karim al-Rahman had become the subject of countless rumors, all centered around the mysterious pregnant woman living in his mansion. While he maintained his professional composure in meetings and deal negotiations, those who knew him best could see subtle changes in the powerful businessman. Sarah noticed these changes too, especially during their now regular evening conversations in the garden. Tonight she watched as Karim loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, small gestures that revealed how comfortable he'd become in her presence. "The board meeting didn't go well?" she asked, noting the tension in his shoulders. Karim gave her a rueful smile. "Is it that obvious?" He settled beside her on the garden bench, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Marcus has been persistent in spreading his version of events among my business associates." Sarah's heart sank. "He's trying to damage your reputation because of me." "No," Karim said firmly, turning to face her. "He's trying to manipulate the situation because that's what he does. I've seen his type before in business. Men who use pressure and intimidation when they can't get their way." A cool evening breeze carried the scent of jasmine from the garden, and Sarah wrapped her arms around herself. Without hesitation, Karim shrugged off his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The gesture was so natural, so protective, that it made her throat tight with emotion. "There's something I need to tell you," she said quietly, gathering her courage. "Something about Marcus that I've never told anyone." Karim remained silent, giving her space to continue, though his body tensed slightly beside her. "Before he threw me out, I discovered something in his office." Sarah's voice trembled slightly. "Documents showing he'd been embezzling from his company. That's why he panicked when I told him about the baby. He thought I knew about his schemes and would use it against him." Karim's sharp intake of breath was the only indication of his surprise. "Do you have proof?" Sarah nodded slowly. "I took photos of some documents before he caught me in his office. They're stored in a secure cloud account. I was going to report him, but then—" She gestured to her pregnant belly. "Survival became more important." "Sarah," Karim's voice was gentle but urgent, "this changes everything. With this evidence we can—" "Mr. al-Rahman," Ahmad's voice cut through the evening air as he hurried across the garden. "I apologize for the interruption, but there's an urgent situation." Karim stood instinctively positioning himself between Sarah and his approaching assistant. "What is it?" "Sir, Mr. Bennett has gone to the media. He's given an interview to the Business Daily, claiming that Ms. Mitchell stole confidential documents from his company before disappearing. He's painting himself as the victim of corporate espionage." Sarah's gasp of disbelief made both men turn. She had gone pale. One hand pressed against her belly, as if to protect the baby from even hearing these accusations. "He's trying to get ahead of the story," she whispered. "He knows I have proof of what he did, so he's discrediting me before I can use it." Karim's expression hardened with determination. He turned to Ahmad. "Get our PR team and legal department on this immediately. I want a complete background check on Marcus Bennett, everything from his business dealings to his parking tickets." Then, to Sarah's surprise, he pulled out his phone and made a call. "Amira, I need your help. Yes, it's about Sarah." Sarah looked at him questioningly. "Who's Amira?" "My sister," Karim explained, his expression softening slightly. "She's one of Dubai's top investigative journalists. If anyone can help us expose the truth about Marcus while protecting your reputation, it's her." The revelation that Karim had a sister, one he'd never mentioned before, momentarily distracted Sarah from her panic. "You have a sister?" Yes, and she's been quite curious about you. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. She's been pestering me for weeks to meet you. Before Sarah could respond, she felt a sharp kick from the baby that made her wince. Karim was at her side instantly, one hand on her back, the other reaching for her belly, a gesture that had become almost reflexive for him. "Are you all right?" The concern in his voice made her heart flutter. "Yes, just someone expressing their opinion rather forcefully." She managed a weak smile, placing her hand over his where it rested on her belly. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the chaos of Marcus's accusations seemed to fade away. The way Karim looked at her, with such tender concern, such fierce protectiveness, made Sarah realize something that both thrilled and terrified her. Somewhere along the way, this man had become much more than just her protector. What they didn't know was that Amira's investigation would uncover far more than just Marcus's financial crimes. The truth she would discover would shake the foundations of everything they thought they knew about each other, forcing them to confront not just their growing feelings, but also the shadows of their own pasts that they'd tried so hard to leave behind. Amira al-Rahman strode into her brother's study with the confident air of someone used to uncovering secrets. Her designer hijab and sharp business suit marked her as every bit the powerful professional her brother was, but there was a fire in her eyes that spoke of relentless determination. "You're not going to believe what I found," she announced, setting her laptop on Karim's desk. Sarah, who had been sitting across from Karim discussing the upcoming doctor's appointment, started to rise, but Amira waved her back down. "Please stay. This concerns you most of all." Karim moved to stand behind Sarah's chair, his presence reassuring. Over the past week, Amira had been digging deep into Marcus Bennett's background, using her considerable journalistic resources and connections. "Marcus Bennett isn't his real name," Amira began, turning her laptop screen toward them. "He's Marcus Blackwood, and he's done this before, multiple times." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth as she stared at the screen, which showed several news articles from different countries. Each told a similar story: women who had been charmed, isolated, and then discarded by a man matching Marcus's description, but under different names. "He's a professional con man," Amira continued, her voice tight with controlled anger. "He targets successful companies, gets close to someone who can give him access, and then systematically embezzles funds. When he's taken what he can, he disappears, leaving behind a trail of broken lives and emptied bank accounts." Karim's hands tightened on the back of Sarah's chair. "And the authorities?" "He's always managed to stay one step ahead, moving between countries, changing identities. But this time," Amira's eyes gleamed, "this time he made a mistake. He got greedy and he underestimated Sarah." Sarah looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" "Those documents you photographed." Amira smiled grimly. "They're not just evidence of simple embezzlement. They're proof of a massive international financial fraud scheme. Marcus, or whatever his real name is, has been using his position to launder money for some very dangerous people." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Sarah felt the baby kick, as if responding to her sudden spike of anxiety. Without thinking, Karim moved his hand to her shoulder, offering silent support. "There's more," Amira said, her expression softening slightly as she watched her brother's protective gesture. "Sarah, did you ever wonder why Marcus chose you specifically? Why he worked so hard to get close to you?" Sarah shook her head, her throat tight. "I assumed I was just convenient, naive." "No," Amira said firmly. "You were chosen because of who you are, or rather, because of who your father was." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Sarah stared at Amira. "My father? But he was just a small-town banker in England. He passed away when I was in college." "Your father, James Mitchell, was more than just a banker," Amira explained gently. "He was a whistleblower who exposed a major financial scandal before his accident. The case was buried, but the evidence he gathered was never found. Marcus must have thought you knew where it was." Sarah's mind raced, memories flooding back. The odd questions Marcus had asked about her family, his intense interest in her father's old papers, the way he'd encouraged her to bring everything when she moved in with him. "Oh God," she whispered, realization dawning. The key. Dad gave me an old safety deposit box key before the accident. I never knew what it was for. Marcus was always asking about family heirlooms, trying to get me to remember if Dad had left me anything important. Karim knelt beside her chair, taking her trembling hands in his. "Sarah, look at me," he said softly. "None of this is your fault. You couldn't have known." "Karim's right," Amira added, "but now we have an advantage. Marcus doesn't know that we've discovered his true identity or his real motives. And more importantly, he doesn't know that we know about the safety deposit box." Sarah looked between the siblings, seeing the same determination in their expressions. "What do we do now?" "Now," Karim said, his voice carrying a steel edge she'd never heard before. "We set a trap. Marcus wants to play games? Let's show him what happens when he threatens someone under the protection of the Al-Rahman family." As Amira began outlining their plan, Sarah felt the baby move again, but this time it wasn't from anxiety. Something had shifted in the air, a sense of power returning, of justice within reach. She looked at Karim, still holding her hands, and saw in his eyes not just protection, but a partnership she'd never expected to find. What none of them realized was that Marcus had one more secret yet to be revealed, one that would test not only their carefully laid plans, but also the growing bond between Karim and Sarah. As they prepared to turn the tables on their enemy, fate was preparing its own surprising twist. The safety deposit box key felt impossibly heavy in Sarah's hand as she sat in the private room of Dubai's most prestigious bank. Karim stood beside her, his presence steady and reassuring, while Amira waited outside with their legal team. The past week had been a whirlwind of preparation, leading to this moment. "Are you ready?" Karim asked softly, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Sarah took a deep breath, remembering her father's face the day he'd given her the key. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew something might happen to him, and he trusted me to keep this safe." The bank manager inserted his master key, and together they opened the safety deposit box that had remained untouched for nearly a decade. Inside they found a sealed envelope and a small external hard drive, both carefully preserved. With trembling fingers, Sarah opened the envelope. Inside was a letter in her father's familiar handwriting. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then my fears were justified. What I've uncovered goes deeper than anyone could have imagined. The evidence on this drive exposes a network of financial corruption that spans continents. I couldn't trust anyone else with this, only you, my brilliant, honest daughter. I'm sorry for the burden this places on you. Know that everything I did was to create a better world for you to live in. All my love, Dad." Sarah's vision blurred with tears as Karim gently took the letter, reading it himself before carefully folding it and returning it to her. "Your father was a hero," he said, quietly. "And now we can finish what he started." Back at the mansion, Amira's tech team worked to decrypt the hard drive while Sarah rested in the garden, one hand absently stroking her belly as she processed everything. The baby had been particularly active today, as if sensing the significance of events. Karim found her there as the sun began to set, carrying 2 cups of the herbal tea she'd grown fond of. "The team has managed to access some of the files," he said, settling beside her. "Your father documented everything meticulously, names, dates, transaction records. It's all there." "Including Marcus's real identity?" Sarah asked, accepting the tea gratefully. "Yes, he's been connected to this organization for years, working under different aliases, but Sarah..." Karim hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "The information your father gathered, combined with your evidence of Marcus's current activities, it's enough to bring down some very powerful people. Are you sure you want to move forward with this?" Sarah met his concerned gaze steadily. "My father gave his life to expose the truth. I won't let his sacrifice be in vain." She placed her free hand over his. "But Karim, you don't have to be involved in this. You've already done so much." "Stop," he interrupted gently, turning his hand to intertwine their fingers. "I'm exactly where I want to be, where I need to be." The intensity in his dark eyes made her breath catch, In that moment, the air between them seemed charged with everything they'd left unspoken over the past months. "Sarah, Karim began, but was interrupted by Ahmad hurrying into the garden. "Sir, Miss Amira needs you both immediately. There's been a development." They found Amira in Karim's study, her expression a mix of triumph and concern. "We've decoded more of the files," she announced, "and we've discovered something unexpected. Marcus isn't working alone in Dubai. He has a partner, someone who's been helping him stay one step ahead of authorities." "Who?" Karim demanded. Amira pulled up a document on her laptop. "Someone high up in the business community. Someone who's been feeding him information about your movements, Karim. Someone who knew exactly when Sarah came to stay here." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. "Someone close to you," she whispered, looking at Karim. "Someone who could monitor your activities without raising suspicion." Karim's expression darkened as understanding dawned. "Hassan," he said, his voice cold, "my own chief financial officer." "Yes," Amira confirmed. "He's been Marcus's inside man for years, helping him target vulnerable companies and cover his tracks. And now he's helping Marcus try to discredit me and get to Sarah," Karim finished, his jaw tight with controlled anger. Sarah felt the baby kick sharply, responding to her sudden anxiety. Karim noticed immediately, moving to her side and placing a protective hand on her belly, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "What do we do?" Sarah asked, unconsciously leaning into his touch. Amira's eyes gleamed with determination. "We use this. Hassan doesn't know we've discovered his connection to Marcus, and tomorrow morning, when they both attend the board meeting, we'll be ready," Karim finished, his arm tightening around Sarah. "It's time to end this." As they began planning their next moves, Sarah couldn't help but marvel at how much her life had changed. From a woman alone and afraid, she had found not just protection, but a whole family ready to fight for justice alongside her. And as she looked at Karim, seeing the fierce determination in his eyes, she realized that somewhere along the way, her heart had made a decision her mind was only now catching up to. What none of them could have predicted was that Marcus and Hassan had one final card to play, one that would force both Karim and Sarah to confront their deepest fears and finally acknowledge the true nature of their feelings for each other. The morning of the board meeting dawned clear and bright, but tension hung heavy in the air at the Al Rahman mansion. Sarah stood in Karim's study, watching as he adjusted his tie with unusual precision. After months of living under his protection, she had learned to read the subtle signs of his stress, the slight tightness around his eyes, the careful control of his movements. "You don't have to be there," he said, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "Amira and the legal team can handle everything." Sarah moved to stand behind him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I need to be there," she said firmly. "I need to face them both, Marcus and Hassan. I won't hide anymore." Karim turned to face her, his expression softening as he took in her determined stance. She wore an elegant maternity dress in deep blue, her honey brown hair swept up professionally. At 8 months pregnant, she radiated, a quiet strength that made his heart tighten with emotions he could no longer deny. "Sarah," he began, reaching for her hand, but was interrupted by Amira's arrival. "Everything's in place," his sister announced, her eyes bright with anticipation. "The evidence is ready, the legal team is standing by, and I have a trusted reporter waiting to break the story as soon as we give the signal." The ride to the Al Rahman Group headquarters was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Sarah felt the baby move restlessly, as if sensing the importance of what was to come. Karim's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. The boardroom was already full when they arrived. Hassan's face showed a flicker of surprise at Sarah's presence before his professional mask slipped back into place. And there, sitting confidently at the far end of the table, was Marcus. "What is she doing here?" Marcus demanded, standing. "This is a private board meeting." "Ms. Mitchell is here at my invitation," Karim said coolly, helping Sarah to a seat before taking his place at the head of the table. "As are the representatives from the Financial Crimes Unit, who have just joined us." On cue, several serious-looking men in suits entered the room. Hassan's face went pale, while Marcus's confident smile froze in place. "What is the meaning of this, Karim?" Hassan asked, his voice carefully controlled. "I think you know exactly what this is about, old friend," Karim replied, his voice carrying an edge of steel. "Or should we ask your partner, Mr. Blackwood, or do you prefer Bennett? I'm sure you have many names to choose from." The room erupted in murmurs as Amira began distributing folders to each board member. These documents outline a decade-long scheme of financial fraud, money laundering, and corporate espionage, she explained crisply. A scheme that has claimed many victims, including James Mitchell, whose investigation was tragically cut short. Sarah stood, her voice clear and strong despite her racing heart. "My father discovered your network years ago," she said, looking directly at Marcus. "That's why you targeted me, isn't it? You thought I had his evidence. And now we have both his evidence and yours," Karim added, his pride in Sarah evident in his voice. "Game over, gentlemen." Marcus's charming facade cracked, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," he snarled. "Hassan, tell them what's at stake." Hassan rose slowly, his face ashen. "Karim, be reasonable. Think about the company's reputation. If this gets out, the company's reputation." Karim's voice was quiet, but carried throughout the room. "You helped this man target innocent people. You betrayed my trust, endangered Sarah and her child, all for what? Money?" "It wasn't just about money," Hassan snapped, his composure finally breaking. "You were always too soft, too concerned with ethics and morality. Do you know how many opportunities we missed because of your principles? Marcus showed me how to make real power moves, how to steal, lie, and destroy lives," Sarah interrupted, her hand protectively cradling her belly. "Is that your definition of power?" The baby kicked sharply and Sarah winced slightly. Karim was at her side instantly, one hand supporting her elbow, the other moving instinctively to her belly. The tender gesture wasn't lost on anyone in the room, least of all Marcus. "How touching," he sneered. "The businessman and the pregnant damsel in distress. Tell me, Karim, does she make you feel like a hero? Is that why you've been protecting her?" Karim's expression hardened, but before he could respond, Sarah stepped forward. "He doesn't need to prove anything to you," she said, her voice steady. "Karim is twice the man you'll ever be, simply because he's genuine. Something you wouldn't understand." The Financial Crimes Unit officers moved forward, but Marcus made one last desperate attempt. "You think this is over?" He laughed bitterly. "You have no idea how far this goes, how many powerful people are involved. By this time tomorrow..." Amira interrupted, holding up her phone. "This story will be breaking worldwide. Every name, every transaction, every crime, all of it exposed. It's already being uploaded as we speak." As the officers moved to detain Marcus and Hassan, the boardroom erupted in chaos. But in the midst of it all, Karim and Sarah remained connected, his hand still protectively spread across her belly, where their future kicked and moved beneath his palm. What they didn't know was that this confrontation, dramatic as it was, would lead to an even more life-changing revelation, one that would finally force them both to confront the true depth of their feelings for each other. The aftermath of the boardroom confrontation left the Al Rahman mansion in a strange state of calm. The media storm raged outside, with Amira's exposé making headlines worldwide. But within the mansion's walls, a different kind of tension was building. Sarah stood on her familiar terrace, watching the sunset paint the Dubai skyline in shades of gold and pink. The baby was particularly active tonight, as if celebrating their victory. Her hand absently traced patterns over her belly, remembering. The way Karim's touch had felt in the boardroom, so natural, so protective, so right. "I thought I'd find you here," Karim's voice came from behind her. She turned to see him approaching, his tie loosened and jacket discarded, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. "Old habits," she smiled softly. "This place has always helped me think." He joined her at the railing, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. The air between them felt charged with unspoken words. "The legal team says Marcus and Hassan will be in custody for a long time," he said after a moment. "Your father's evidence combined with what you discovered. It's over, Sarah. They can't hurt you anymore." Sarah nodded, but her expression remained thoughtful. "It feels strange," she admitted. "For so long, I've been running, hiding, trying to protect myself and the baby. And now?" "And now?" Karim prompted gently when she trailed off. She turned to face him fully, gathering her courage. "Now I have to decide what comes next. The trust fund the board set up for my father's whistleblower evidence, it's enough for me to go anywhere, start a new life." Karim's hand tightened. On the railing, his knuckles going white. "Is that what you want?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. "To leave?" The baby kicked sharply, making Sarah gasp softly. Without thinking, Karim's hand moved to her belly, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. But this time Sarah covered his hand with her own, holding him there. "No," she whispered. "That's not what I want at all." Their eyes met, and suddenly all the feelings they'd been dancing around for months came rushing to the surface. Karim's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb gently tracing her cheekbone. "Sarah," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "these past months, you've changed everything. The way I see the world, the way I see myself. This house was never a home until you came into it." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she leaned into his touch. "I was so afraid," she confessed, "not just of Marcus, but of feeling this way again, of trusting, of letting someone in. But you never asked me to be anything other than who I am. How could I?" Karim smiled tenderly. "Who you are is exactly who I fell in love with." The words hung in the air between them, finally spoken after so long. Sarah's heart felt like it might burst from happiness. "Say it again," she whispered. Karim pulled her closer, one hand still protectively cradling her belly, while the other gently wiped away her tears. "I love you, Sarah Mitchell. You and this little one have become my whole world. Stay with me. Let me be a father to this child, a partner to you. Let me spend the rest of my life showing you what real love should feel like." "We come as a package deal, you know," Sarah said, trying to joke even as tears of joy rolled down her cheeks. "Are you sure you're ready for midnight feedings and diaper changes?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," Karim replied seriously. "I love you both so much it terrifies me sometimes. Please say you'll stay." Instead of answering, with words, Sarah raised herself on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft, tender, full of promise and healing and hope. When they finally parted, they were both smiling through tears. The baby chose that moment to kick again, making them both laugh. Karim knelt down, pressing a gentle kiss to Sarah's belly. "And you, little one," he said softly. "I promise to love and protect you as my own, always." The sound of throat clearing made them both look up. Amira stood in the doorway, trying and failing to hide her smile. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, her eyes twinkling, "but there's something you both need to see." As they followed Amira inside, hands clasped tightly together, neither Sarah nor Karim could have predicted the final surprise that fate had in store for them, a revelation that would make their happiness even more complete than they could have imagined. 1 year later, the Al Rahman Mansion's garden was transformed into a wonderland of twinkling lights and fragrant blooms. The sound of gentle music mixed with happy chatter and the occasional delighted squeal of a baby boy. In the center of it, all Sarah watched with tears in her eyes as Karim danced with their son, little James, who had just taken his first steps earlier that week. "I still can't believe how much has changed in a year," Amira said, joining Sarah at her table. "Though I have to admit, seeing my powerful businessman brother making silly faces at a baby is quite entertaining." Sarah laughed, her hand unconsciously touching the delicate diamond ring on her finger. The past year had been a whirlwind of joy, changes and unexpected blessings. After their emotional declaration of love on the terrace, Amira had brought them life-changing news. The final piece of evidence from her father's files had revealed that Marcus's network had been responsible for orchestrating the accident that had taken her father's life. The revelation had brought closure to a wound Sarah hadn't even realized was still open. With Marcus and his associates facing justice, she could finally put the past to rest and focus on her future, a future that had become more beautiful than she could have imagined. Karim had proposed 2 months after James was born, on the same terrace where they had first admitted their feelings. The intimate wedding ceremony had taken place in the mansion's garden, with little James dressed in a tiny tuxedo that matched his adoptive father's. Karim had surprised Sarah by having her father's favorite flowers, white lilies, arranged throughout the garden. "Remember when you first came here?" Amira asked, pulling Sarah from her memories. "You were so wary of everyone and everything." "I had good reason to be," Sarah replied, watching as Karim kissed their son's cheek, making the baby giggle. "But your brother, he never pushed, never demanded. He just showed me day after day what real love looks like." The foundation Sarah had established to help vulnerable pregnant women had become a beacon of hope in Dubai. Using the trust fund from her father's evidence, combined with Karim's business expertise, they had created a network of support services, safe houses, and educational programs. "Mrs. Al-Rahman," Ahmad approached with a warm smile, "everything is ready for the announcement." Sarah stood, smoothing her elegant evening dress. Tonight's garden party had a special purpose, the official launch of the James Mitchell Foundation's international expansion. What had started as a way to honor her father's memory had grown into something far greater. Karim joined her at the podium. James settled contentedly in his arms. The sight of them together still made Sarah's heart swell with love. As she looked out at the gathered crowd, friends, family, supporters of the foundation, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "A year ago," she began, her voice clear and strong, "I was alone, afraid, and without hope. But life has a way of bringing us exactly what we need, even if it comes in unexpected packages." She smiled at Karim, who returned her look with such love it nearly took her breath away. The James Mitchell Foundation started as a dream to help women in crisis, but it's become so much more. Today, we're not just launching our international programs, we're celebrating the power of second chances, the strength of family, and the endless possibilities that come when we open our hearts to love. Karim stepped forward, adjusting James on his hip. "Today is also special for another reason," he announced, his eyes twinkling with joy. "Sarah and I are delighted to share that in about 7 months, James will be a big brother." The crowd erupted in cheers and congratulations. Sarah's hand moved to her still flat stomach as Karim pulled her close, creating a family embrace that made little James squeal with delight. Later that evening, as the party wound down, Sarah and Karim found themselves back on their terrace. James had fallen asleep in his father's arms, his little face peaceful in the soft evening light. "Happy?" Karim asked softly, pressing a kiss to her temple. "More than I ever thought possible," Sarah replied, leaning into him. "Sometimes I wonder what my father would think of all this." "He'd be proud," Karim said with conviction, "of everything you've accomplished, of the lives you're changing through the foundation, of the family we've built." Sarah looked up at her husband, seeing in his eyes the same love and devotion that had healed her heart and given her the strength to trust again. "Our family," she corrected gently, placing his free hand on her stomach. As they stood there together, the Dubai skyline glittering before them, Sarah marveled at how life's greatest challenges often lead to its greatest blessings. What had started as a chance encounter on a busy street had blossomed into a love story for the ages, proof that, with faith, courage, and an open heart, even the most unexpected beginnings can lead to the most beautiful endings. The end. Dear listeners, we hope that Sarah and Karim's journey has touched your hearts as deeply as it has touched ours. Their story reminds us that true love can heal even the deepest wounds, and that family is born not just of blood, but of choice and dedication. If you've enjoyed this tale of romance, redemption, and second chances, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. We've prepared a special playlist of equally moving love stories that you can find by clicking the link to your left. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear which moment in Sarah and Karim's story touched you the most. Join us tomorrow for another unforgettable journey into the heart of love. Until then, keep believing in the power of unexpected beginnings.